Hi everyone, is everyone getting signed in, I hope? Because I think we're going to get started pretty soon. It's 4 o'clock. It's going to be hard for me that this is interactive and I'm not able to get to hear back from you guys. I'm only able to talk to you. From reading your papers from the first webinar, I see that you guys found it very informative. I hope that you find this one informative as well. It might not be as fun of information as the first one, but hopefully it will be as informative. So I think we'll go ahead and get started so that we get done in a timely fashion. As you know, what we're here today to be talking about is seclusion, restraint, and timeout. And I'm going to start our PowerPoint. We're going to start out with a video. And the only thing that I want you to think about when you're watching this video is that the background doesn't match what they're talking about. It's supposed to be a teacher and a student, and it's animated. And they're supposed to be in a classroom, but it looks like they're in a convenience store. And so I think some of the animation got a little mixed up. But I like the video because it talks about what we're going to be discussing today. And so I think that that is helpful. So let's get started and watch the video, and just if you can think about it being in a classroom instead of that it looks like it's in a convenience store. Whoops, that didn't work. Hold on. Let's remember this is the first time that I have ever done a presentation like this, so you guys can all laugh at my technical difficulties that I am having. I will allow that. Okay? Maybe by next year I will be awesome at doing this, right? Okay.
My name is Jimmy. I am a fourth grade student in Mrs. Arnold's class. I have been diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and a learning disability. I don't like to do my classwork. I have complained to my teacher that I shouldn't have to do it because I will fail anyway, so what is the point? I yell and cuss when I am asked to do classwork. Sometimes I throw things. I have begun to be physically aggressive by pushing my teacher and other students when I am frustrated. Mrs. Arnold, I need help. I don't understand how to do this work.
Timmy, why aren't you in your seat again? I am tired of telling you to sit down.
But Mrs. Arnold, I don't know how to do this. Why won't you help me?
Timmy, I have already explained the lesson. You weren't paying attention. Go sit down. You aren't supposed to be up. It is work time.
I hate it here. I just want my question answered. It's not my fault that you are stupid.
You will not talk to me in that manner. You better believe that your mother will hear about this. You go to your desk and put your head down.
Go ahead and call my mom. She thinks you can't teach either. This is how you teach? You cannot make me sit down. Why don't you waddle your fat butt back to your desk?
Timmy, you are disrupting the whole class. We shouldn't have to go through this every day. Go to your classwork and stop bothering the class. If you would just pay attention and work harder, you could have been done with your work. This wasn't a hard assignment.
Fat cow. Moo moo. You can shove your work. I'm not doing nothing.
That's it. Pushing that desk over is dangerous to the other students. Get out of my classroom and go to Principal Smith.
Whatever. Here, take this crappy classwork. I like the ladies in the office better than you anyway. Anything is better than being stuck in this hellhole with a witch like you. I'm going to get you fired. You better watch out.
Hello, Principal Smith. I sent Timmy to the office. He was completely out of control. I can't have him in my class anymore. He is disturbed. How can I help him if he doesn't want to learn? I don't think inclusion is working. Timmy needs to be in the special ed class full day. He doesn't belong with regular students. What am I supposed to do with this kid? I can't fix him. He is too much for me. It's too bad that students can't be paddled. If he was my child, I could fix him with my belt in 2 minutes. When I was in school, this kind of behavior was not tolerated. I became a teacher to help students learn, not to be a babysitter to future inmates. What are your observations about this interaction? What were Timmy's behaviors? What do you think about the teacher's behavior? What did she do well? What could she have done better? What was the reason for Timmy's negative behavior?
You guys think about that and wonder, what's going on in our classrooms today, and think about behaviors. I know the video's funny, and you have to laugh at certain parts, but if you think about some of the things that the teacher did that maybe she could have changed, and what goes on, and that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today, because realistically, stuff like that does happen in our classrooms. So, that's what we need to think about. I just want to go back, and now that you have watched that and we've talked about, what we're going to be discussing today, I want to make sure that each participant that is taking this for research credit has signed in their name in the chat box. Once all names have been typed in, you can click on the chat box button, and this will make sure that we have copies of that. You don't need to sign in if you're only attending the class for professional growth with no credit, because credit will only be given to the paras who have signed in and registered for the class. If you do not sign in and you've registered for the class, you won't get credit and you'll have to start over next year. So it's very important that you get signed in if you are attending the webinar today. So if everyone has done that, I think we'll get started with the presentation. And so I'm Sarah Schiller, the new para educator coordinator, for those of you that don't know me or haven't met me yet. A lot of you I do know from working in the schools. And tonight we're going to be talking about seclusion, restraint, and timeout. Along with my paraeducator duties and my core team member duties, I am also a CPI trainer. And those of you who have been trained in CPI, I might have been the one that trained you. And so a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about tonight has come from my CPI training and revolved around that also. And so one of the first things that we're going to talk about is Chapter 103. And Chapter 103 is the state code that discusses the punishment of students in a school setting. And I gave that to you guys as a handout. I attached the whole code. And the only reason I did that was because I just wanted to make you aware of kind of what the whole code involves. It is very difficult to read in its entirety, just because it's, you know, the legal mumbo jumbo and all of that. But I just wanted you to get a feel for kind of what it was all about. And it was just for your reference, you know, to kind of get an understanding of, you know, where it all came from. But we are going to talk about the important parts of it tonight because I want you to have an understanding of it, since a lot of you do deal with kids with behaviors and, you know, have to help with the disciplining of them. So the reason that Chapter 103 came up was because they wanted to make sure that no school staff were using prone restraints or corporal punishment with students any longer. That was one of the biggest reasons that it came up. And I'm not sure if any of you remember, but a few years ago there was a lawsuit in Waukee, which is a suburb of Des Moines, with an autistic student who was left in seclusion in like a timeout room all day, and her parents sued the school district. She had wet herself, you know, wasn't allowed to come out, and the school district stated, you know, that it was as a result of behaviors. They even had it on video. And as a result of that whole entire episode, was kind of another reason for this whole Chapter 103 being reviewed, because they certainly didn't want any more incidences like that happening. And I, along with a lot of other AA staff, a lot of us on the CPI team, reviewed that case when it came through in its entirety. And there were lots of things that were, you know, wrong in that case that went beyond just her being in the timeout room, for the whole day. So, there were lots of problems. It just wasn't that incident. But it definitely made people in the state a lot more aware of, that they needed to make schools aware that there needed to be some rules and restrictions around what they were doing with students. And so this is what they ended up doing. And so they ended up reviewing the Chapter 103, and they made new requirements for restraints, physical confinement, and detention. And this had not been reviewed since 1991, which now seems like a very long time ago. So it was reviewed in the summer of 2008, and the amendments became effective on November 12th of 2008. So one of the big pieces of this, one of the main important pieces is that physical restraints, physical confinement, and detention shall not be used as discipline for minor infractions and may only be used after other disciplinary techniques have been attempted. And I know that kind of sounds like common sense, but you wouldn't believe, even, buildings that I've been in where it's maybe the first thing that's gone to, only because there is a history of behaviors with the student, and so there's lots of baggage there, and so that's something that the teacher or the principal or the person working with the student automatically goes to the worst case scenario with the initial behavior, say that day, because they can't get the history out of their head. And I'm not saying that they do that on purpose, but sometimes it's just hard to get that history out of your head. And so it does happen a lot more frequently than I think a lot of people would like to admit. So I think that's why these things need to be reviewed a lot more frequently and need to be talked about, and school staff and all people working with the students need to be educated on it. Another one of the things that had to be adopted was that all school employees, before using physical restraint or physical confinement and detention, shall receive adequate and periodic training, which shall be documented and include PBIS, alternatives to seclusion and restraint, crisis prevention, crisis intervention, crisis de-escalation, and student and staff debriefing, and the safe and effective uses of physical restraint, physical confinement, and detention. So basically what that whole paragraph is saying is that any employee that is going to restrain or be supervising a student that's being confined in timeout or seclusion needs to be trained adequately. And what they mean by adequate training is that it needs to be done periodically. It needs to be documented how they're training, and the training needs to include all the points listed here. Now, luckily, our AEA offers the CPI training to all of our districts free of charge, and they just have to pay for the books. A lot of our districts take advantage of that, which is a good thing, and our training provides all of these things listed. Some districts don't take advantage of that, but they have to be able to prove that, anyone attending to a student in these situations has had a training of some sort, including these things. So, what my suggestion to you guys as paras is that if you're ever asked to supervise a student that's in seclusion, um, and you haven't been trained in anything that includes these requirements, I would just maybe ask your administrator if they feel that you meet the Chapter 103 requirements to be supervising the student within seclusion, or maybe request that you be trained, or is there some training you can attend because you don't feel comfortable doing that. Because this is an Iowa code, and so it really does need to be followed. I know those are difficult conversations to have, but I think everybody needs to be able to cover themselves in these type of situations. I'm just going to go back a minute. You also need to understand that when we're talking about restraints and the physical confinement, that a restraint is anything that is confining to a child and laying your hands on a child and confining them in any way. So if there's any of you that are working with lower elementary or preschool students, and you have a student who is having a behavior and you maybe sit on the floor and sit them on your lap and hold them there, or you pick them up and carry them from one spot to another, I just want to let you know that that is considered a physical restraint. I'm not going to tell you that it's a restraint that is probably a legal and safe restraint, but I will tell you that it is considered a physical restraint because the child does not have the freedom to move on their own. And you are laying your hands on the child. They are physically confined. If the student is in timeout in a room that they cannot get out of and they're confined, that's considered confinement. So if that is happening and you aren't trained in those things, you need to be very careful. And those of you who have been trained in CPI will know that we are very explicit when we describe our restraints and laying hands on children, even at those early ages, because the children grow up, and even though they're little and it's easier to lay your hands on them and pick them up and to control them in that way when they're younger, it is still considered a restraint, and you shouldn't be doing it according to the code and the philosophies that you're being taught. So I just wanted to kind of describe that and lay that out there for everybody to understand. Okay. So documentation, it is required according to the Iowa Code that an attempt to notify parents on the same day of a physical restraint or physical confinement and detention must be made. So either by phone, leaving a message, or, talking to them. It has to be attempted. And then a written report must be postmarked within 3 school days of the event, and it must include date, time, duration of the event, those involved before, during, and after the event, the alternatives attempted before the event, any injuries that may have occurred or property damage, and a description of future approaches to the student's behavior. And this is all listed in the Iowa Code. So these are all things that need to be documented and reported to the parents. And then, it's suggested that a copy of this report obviously be kept in a school file for future references. And we have come up with a documentation record. I know that we've shared with lots of schools through our CPI training that they have used and that we use as an AEA if we are ever involved with a student, that helps kind of delineate all of these things. And so if any of you are in a school that you don't feel like you guys have a form that you use, we would be more than happy to share that with you. You would just need to let us know. So it's very important to document everything that happens to cover you and to cover the student, to make sure that it's all been well documented on what has happened. And it also helps for going back and seeing to try to figure out the behavior and see if there's patterns or, to prevent future behaviors. Okay, so now within your groups at your sites, I want you guys to kind of discuss, collaborate amongst your group for about 5 to 7 minutes. And these are some points that I want you to discuss. I want you to discuss if your district reviews the Chapter 103 guidelines annually, because that's something that's supposed to be done within a district every year. I want you to talk about if you guys are trained to provide restraints. Do you guys have documentation policy? And then if you guys have any questions, go ahead and place them in the chat box. So I'll give you about 5 or 7 minutes to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and move on. Okay, I think we'll come back together as people have been typing away with lots of questions. And I will try to answer the questions as well as I can. Um, and we'll see how that goes. And some of them, we'll just have to see if I'm able to get them all answered um, or not. So I'm going to go back to the first question that was typed in, which is one from Decora. What is PBS training? Is this different from CPI? PBIS training is positive behavior supports, and that is different from CPI. CPI is a training that is done annually. You're certified, and then you go through a recert training every year, which is verbal de-escalation techniques as well as physical restraint techniques, where PBIS training is a positive behavior support training that a whole school district goes through, and it's something that you do within your district with your students. And it's like a 3 to 4 year training, and then you implement it within your school district. And so they're very different, where PBIS is kind of a curriculum, I would say, that you implement within your district, and CPI is more of a nonviolent physical crisis intervention um, thing that you would use, techniques more. So I hope that helped. Looks like someone they've asked to be trained in CPI multiple times, and their district never gets back to them. They even said they would do it in the summer. Only one person in their building has been trained. Um, I guess what I would say to that is that on our Keystone website, if you go to the workshops, we have all of our CPI trainings listed on there, whether they're located in other districts or they're located in Elkader. And anyone can attend those, even if they're at other districts or in Elkader. As long as you register or you contact the trainer that's listed um, in the class. You can contact them via email and see if there's room in the class for like an outside district person to come in. The ones in Elkader are usually open to all districts. It's not district specified. And you would be able to attend that, um, without it being involving your district. So I would maybe suggest that you go about the training that way if it's something that you feel strongly about getting trained in. And if you have more questions about that, you can email me. Is it correct to say that we all need the requirements or just a few? It would depend. In some buildings, there are only certain people that would ever do physical restraints or supervise students within seclusion. And so it would only be those people, according to the Chapter 103 requirements, that would need that training. In other districts, there's lots of people that they might have, supervise a seclusion room. And so if you think at any time you might get pulled in to do that and you haven't been trained, um, then I would say you do need that training. So it just kind of all depends how different districts handle that. And I know that's not a very good answer, but Every district is different in how they handle those situations. And it depends, maybe how many behavior kids there are or, situations like that. Someone wrote that we've had no training and it's never been reviewed with us. I did read that as you were typing that, and I was trying to go over the Chapter 103 code that I had here because I was almost positive that when this came out, we were told that it had to be reviewed annually with all staff. And I was trying to find that within the document so that I could share it with you. And I couldn't find it. And so then I felt bad because I'm like, where is it? But what I did find in there is that it's supposed to be shared annually with students and parents. And I know that a lot of districts share it like in a newsletter or something like that, during the year. But I couldn't find where it was supposed to be shared with the staff annually. And so I don't know I've if that's been confused with that the staff is supposed to be trained periodically. And so with their training, they're supposed to be notified of the Chapter 103 requirements. So I apologize if I said that wrong, but I was under the impression that everyone was supposed to know about it annually. So if I have that wrong, I'm sorry, but I thought that's the way it was supposed to be. But I do know that anybody that endures any of those things is supposed to be trained periodically. If I do find it in the document, though, I'll let you know. We have annual CPI training. However, some of us have questions about details of the restraint training. If you have the annual CPI training, you should also be going over the restraints within your district. I know that when I do CPI training with the districts I train, we always tell them that if they ever have questions about any of the restraints or they need us to come back and review them before the year is up for us to do research, we're more than willing to come back and talk to them about that. So that might be something as a question for your trainers, or if you feel like you need to practice more, we've always suggested, at least I have at my trainings, I've always suggested that if there are things that you're going to be you think you're going to be utilizing, that maybe at in-services you just kind of practice them quickly, like maybe 5 minutes at an in-service once a month, just to make sure that you are comfortable with them. If you have more specific questions than that, you can let me know, or you can email your trainers also. We have no idea if our district reviews Chapter 103. Some of our staff are trained with CPI and none of the other requirements. And we are not sure if everyone documents incidences. Okay. I would say that if you have no idea if everyone documents the incidences, that is kind of an issue because it really needs to be documented. That is a huge issue. If anybody would ever come back on something and say, my student was injured during this, and then there's like no documentation of what happened, that would be very detrimental. It would also be detrimental because as a trainer in CPI, what we tell people is if, the protocol isn't followed and documentation doesn't state, that you followed the protocol and you did things the way you were taught, that CPI won't back you if things do go to litigation. So it's really important to follow all of those steps. So if you know of things happening and they're not getting documented, um, I would really try to encourage people to um, get that documented because that's very important. Okay, what about elementary students that have to be removed from the classroom? What other ways should it be handled since one cannot physically remove them? Um, if you've been through CPI training, we do have what's called an escort, which is not considered a restraint. It's considered an escort. So you can utilize that to guide someone to be escorted out of the room and to guide them to another room or somewhere else. It's not considered a restraint because they are able to move on their own. Um, and so that is the way that we suggest incidences like that are handled. And you are taught that in CPI training, you're taught the escort. And the audience can also be removed. And if it happens multiple times a day, then I guess the function of the behavior needs to be looked at, maybe with the AEA team, because obviously something's not working. But yeah, the escort situation can also be used. If you do restrain, do you need to have CPI and the PBIS and all that you have listed, or just is CPI enough? CPI is just enough. They just list the PBIS as an option, as some of the things. We talk about PBIS in our CPI training. So CPI is just enough if you are restraining a student. So hope that was clear. Okay, I think we got through all the questions. So we're going to move on. Okay, so now we're going to move on and talk about some de-escalation techniques. And this is more, like verbal techniques. If you're having increased behavior, increased anxiety in a student, what are some things that you can do to help calm them down, get them back to where they're supposed to be, get them back to what they're supposed to be doing without it being a full-blown temper tantrum or a full-blown, blow-up behavior. The best way to be able to de-escalate a situation is to always remain calm, to always have resources and to always have a plan. Um, and to have multiple plans, because if one doesn't work, you need to have a spare. So you always have to be thinking and always be thinking, okay, well, if this happens, I'm going to do this. If this happens, I'm going to do this. So, you always have to be thinking and be on your toes. Another important thing is, to develop rapport with your student. You need to have a good relationship, with the student that you're working with. And I know that's not always easy, and it can be difficult at times, because we don't always like all of our students. Not everybody can like everybody. But if you can at least develop some type of a relationship and a rapport with them, especially if you're going to be spending a lot of time with them, and provide some type of support to them when you see them starting to get maybe anxious, or you think maybe they're getting a little agitated, that might even prevent them from escalating in the first place. I always tell people that at the start of the day, even just, giving them a good morning and, let's have a great day, or how was your bus ride? How was your night? Letting them know that you care might be enough to get them through the day. Um, I also tell people that even when you're walking through the hall and you see them, giving them a little smile, instead of walking through the hall with tunnel vision and blinders on and kind of ignoring everybody around you, because there's always those kids that see you, and even though you don't see them and you're not reacting, and if you might have kind of a growly look on your face, those kids are going to notice that, and they're going to think, oh, they're mad at me. When you didn't even notice them, but they noticed you. And so it's really important to just kind of go out of your way, and even if you don't feel like it, giving them that little smile, because it might, mean the world to them, and give them that push they need to prevent them from maybe escalating later. A big thing is to really avoid power struggles. And you can do this by being directive. When they're starting to escalate, they're really trying to press your buttons. My kids are excellent at this. Any of you that have kids, I'm sure, they're good at it too. They know how to push your buttons. They know how to get you to just blow up. And so these kids that you work with on a consistent basis, they know how to do that too. And so if you can avoid that and not allow them to push your buttons, it's going to save you a lot of time and energy from them escalating. And so how you can do that is you just have to ignore what they're doing to push your buttons and just be directive. You know, they're saying to you, well, I don't want to do that. Who are you to make me do that? Or, well, I want to do this. And, they're trying to get you off subject, or they're trying to say something else to you. And you're just telling them, we're going to go to lunch now. Kind of like that broken record. This is what we're going to do. This is what we're going to do. And eventually they're going to understand, all right, and hopefully that's enough, to work. I'm not saying it's always going to work, but you can't get into the argument with them, because that's what they want. And so, you can't do it, because then you're feeding into what they want. And so you just have to avoid that at all costs. Some of the things that, are also going to help you do that is by setting limits, giving them their expectations, being consistent with that, by giving them choices. And, with their choices, they need to be clear and simple. Don't make them all drawn out and, lots of directives. They need to be reasonable. They really need to match, what they're doing. And they need to be enforceable. If it's something that you can't enforce, then it really isn't going to be a good choice, for them. And there's lots of different kinds of choices. You can either do this or go to the office. I like to give choices that it's going to get them to do it no matter what. You're going to do your worksheet. You can either do it at your desk or you can do it at the back table. So they're still going to do it, but they get to choose where. And sometimes, a lot of times, I get told by teachers that if you're letting them get out of something, or letting them do something else first, that they're winning. I had a teacher once, we had a kid with lots of behavior issues and got called to the classroom quite frequently for behaviors. And I got called in once to the classroom. There were already 3 teachers in the room, and they were all like over top of him, and he was mad and, didn't want to do anything. And I'm like, okay, you just need to walk away and leave him be for a little bit. And the teacher said out loud in front of him, oh, so he wins? And I just had to kind of walk backwards a little bit and say, nobody wins. We're giving him a break for a minute. Because I'm like, you can't view it that way. You have to view the situation as, do you want a big blow up and a big physical altercation? Or if we walk away for a few minutes and he calms down and then we get him to do something, isn't that a win-win? So it's not about winning and losing. It's not about who has the power and who doesn't. I like to view it as, how do we have a successful day in the classroom? How do we keep the classroom calm all day? That's a successful day. And try not to think about it as winning and losing, because that's a power struggle. And if the teacher feels they always have to be the winner, then they're joining that power struggle. And it's really hard to do. And I have issues with that with my own children. It sometimes is easier to preach than to practice, but you really will be able to avoid a lot of escalations if you can walk away from those power struggles. Okay, the next thing that I want to share with you is there's a book that I feel is very helpful, and again, because my technology wasn't the way it was supposed to be, Dr. Jed Baker, I have heard him speak numerous times. He writes a lot of books about kids on the spectrum, but one of the books that he has written, No More Meltdowns. And I don't know if any of you have read this book, but it is an excellent book for strategies for managing and preventing out of control behavior. It's a pretty easy read, pretty short. There's lots of pages with different strategies, kind of sums up different things. As you read it, you kind of go, well, duh, that's common sense. But yet, it seems like common sense, but then you're like, so why don't people do that? You know? But and he gives good examples to explain kind of, how things work. And a lot of it is more meant for like parents and their children at home, but I think a lot of them, can be used um, also with students. So I just wanted to show you what the book looked like, and then I'm going to talk about some of the things that he has in the book. Um, and I didn't know this, but when I pulled this up, I saw that he had an app for the iPad called No More Meltdowns. I went to the App Store to look to see what it was all about, and it was like $11. And I'm like, oh, that's not really worth it when there's lots of apps out there that are a lot cheaper than that. And I think what the app is more about recording behaviors, like kind of a tally system and things. And um, that's not really something that's necessary at this time. So, um, so we will go back to where we were. Okay, so in No More Meltdowns, on page 37, and I just put the page numbers in because if some of you have this book or if you do happen to get the book and look at it, I just wanted you to have the pages to reference. It talks about de-escalating meltdowns. And the thing that I like about this is it uses the tool of distractions for de-escalating a meltdown. And we use this frequently in our home. My husband likes to use humor, and it works great. And we've also used it with kids on the spectrum a lot in schools. And I mean, so I know that it works greatly. And I don't want you to think that it should be used all the time because it shouldn't be. But if you have a student who is just having, a complete fit and you can't seem to calm them down with, say they have a plan and it's not working and you need to calm them down. You don't know what else to do, or they may look like they're going to harm themselves and you'd like to try something before using a physical restraint. Okay? You could try a distraction. Okay? So a distraction might be, hey, look over there, look what's outside. Look at the flag blowing in the breeze. It looks really windy out today, like if the kid likes weather. Um, something like that. Or if the kid, really likes to play cards, you could pull out a deck of cards and be like, I really want to play Uno right now, but if you're screaming, we can't play Uno. And see if that's a distraction. A lot of times what we'll do at home, if my son's having a fit or something, is we'll be like, oh, don't make me get out, the tickle fingers, or, something like that. Or my husband will pretend like he ran into the door, or, something like that. And a lot of times it's just enough to kind of distract them and enough to calm them down so that they kind of forget what they were having a fit about and they can calm themselves. You kind of get them engaged in the distraction itself. And you don't really want to use the distraction to have them avoid the task that you were trying to get them to do. And you may be able to go back to that task, or you may be able to go back and process what happened, once they're calm. But the whole reason behind using the distraction is because if they're so escalated and so upset, they're not being rational at that time. And so you can't process with them during that time because they're too mad and they're just saying things that don't make sense and they can't listen to you and it's just escalating them more, and they need to be calm in order to process and to, make sense, and so you're not getting anywhere anyway. So if you can use a distraction, it's not, you don't want it to be, something positive all the time that they're getting to do, because then you might see behaviors happening more often because, ooh, I get to play Uno every time I scream my head off. You don't want that pattern to start. But you can see how they're effective and when they become a problem. But I just really want you guys to realize how effective and useful of a tool distractions can be in terms of behavior in meltdowns. Another thing that Jed Baker talks about in this book is when you have to stop fun activities. And when I think of fun activities for students in school, I think of preferred activities. So say a student really likes math, but they hate reading. So what we would call that is math is a preferred activity and reading is a non-preferred activity. Okay, so how do you get them to stop their preferred activity if they know they're going to have to do a non-preferred activity, or vice versa? Or how do you get them to stop to do anything that they like doing? Because they may want to just do it forever. Okay, so say the first one is sensory stimulation. So say it's iPad time or computer time in the classroom, and that's usually a very preferred activity for a lot of students. So usually what I tell people is the expectations need to be laid out even before the activity starts. They need to know that there's going to be a start and an end time, which kind of goes into the next one, timing. But you also need to make sure that you can get in their line of vision when you're talking to them when it comes to sensory stimulation, if they're doing an activity that's sensory, because you aren't going to be able to talk to them unless you're in their line of vision, okay? Because they're being stimulated. Their senses are being stimulated. So you have to get within their line of vision, between them and whatever they're being stimulated by, and then give them advance warning, say, before the computer is turned off. And that should help. If you use timing, they're a lot better at accepting the end of an activity at the natural end. So say if they love reading, they're going to be a lot better at accepting that it's the end of reading if it's the end of the book, rather than having to stop in the middle of a book. Or say it's the end of a chapter instead of the middle of a chapter. So trying to see if you can find natural ends instead of the middle of something. They're going to be a lot better off ending an activity at a natural end. So that's how you can kind of affect the timing piece. Task difficulty. This is where, if you have really clear expectations before they begin, schedule their time for when they will have to stop. Remind them ahead of time, giving them warnings. Make it easier to stop an activity by having another preferred activity afterwards. Can also make it easier. Visual supports are very helpful. You can use picture cues, like now we're going to do this, next we're going to do this. Visual timer, so they can actually see how much time is left of the activity. A written schedule to let them know, what their day looks like and what the schedule, how it's going to flow. You can actually teach them skills, throughout the day of, stopping at the right time, by modeling that you're going to promise to play it again. And when I think about this, and I know this sounds really strange, but I'm a dog lover and we have 2 dogs right now and we had one previous. So, we've trained 3 puppies in my married life. And so I think of, when we trained our puppies to be in their kennels, like when we would go to work and stuff, I was always told that when you train them in their kennels, and all 3 of my puppies were very different when it came to training them in their kennels, but we were told that you put them in the kennel, and you leave them for like 5 minutes, and then you come back and let them out. And then you put them in the kennel and you leave them for 10 minutes and come back and let them out. And what that does is that they know that you're always going to come back and let them out. And you're always increasing the time, gradually. And so we're modeling and teaching them the skill that it's okay to be in your kennel because we're going to come back eventually. And so for some reason, I just think of that with this, that we're teaching them the skill that it's okay to stop this activity because we're going to come back and do it again tomorrow or this afternoon or, and so by teaching and modeling, those skills with them, like, say you're out for recess and they don't want to stop recess. And so you're showing them the visual schedule. Look, we have recess again this afternoon. We do all these other things, then we get to come back out for recess. Those types of things. And, we're working on a reward loss system. They earn things for following, stopping at the right time and different things. They earn a chip and lose a chip if they don't stop when they're supposed to, different things like that. And, even consider physical strategies, where, we've learned that physical exercise can increase their mood and they'll have more willingness to work for us. So, doing a little bit of activity, say, having to run an errand up and down the hall, then they might work harder for us on a non-preferred activity. I really encourage teachers to do that with some of our kids that can't pay attention very well, to have them run an errand or take some books to the library or, whatnot before they have to do a non-preferred activity. Okay, so again, I'm going to let you guys have some discussion and collaboration for about 5 to 7 minutes. Some of the things I want you to talk about are, what are some of the main behavior issues you have with your students? Do you feel like you guys have an effective plan to deal with them? What is the most effective tool you have? If you have questions for me, go ahead and put them in the chat box. So go ahead and talk amongst your group and discuss some of these things and collaborate as a group. Okay, still here. I was just waiting to see if someone was going to write some questions. You guys were writing like crazy last time, but um, no one seems to have any questions this time. I hope you guys had some discussion. And we will, that actually is the last slide. But something that I want to review just a little bit before we end is when we were talking at the beginning about seclusion and restraint and confinement. One of the things that I didn't hit on, and I wanted to, but I kind of forgot, was in the Chapter 103 guidelines, if a student is placed in seclusion, they cannot be in seclusion longer than 60 minutes without it being reevaluated by like an administrator saying that it's okay for them to still be in there. And it always has to be monitored by an adult. That's very important. And the time and the space has to be adequate for the age of the student. And the space has to be, not have any objects that can do harm and things like that in there. So that's very important also. But the piece about the 60 minutes is really important, that it's evaluated frequently so that, they're not in there all day without, really being evaluated if it is continuing to be necessary for them to be in seclusion. So I wanted to make sure that I made that point. Now, I know that we seem to be done a little bit early, but the thing is that this was all that I wanted to share tonight. But if you guys would, if you have any questions about anything that we've talked about, if you put them in the chat box, I can answer them. Otherwise, I'm going to state that the other half an hour of our time is for you guys to sit in your groups and you can collaborate about behaviors, and you can share different techniques and tools that you use. Obviously, I'm not there to see how you utilize that time, so that will be up to you. But what you need to remember is that each participant taking this course for recertification credit needs to write and submit a one-page paper. This paper will be scored on a pass-fail system using the scoring rubric found on the website under the recertification column. Please refer to it when writing your paper. Your paper should be submitted to me, Sarah Schiller, in the West Union Field Office, Van Route 5, no later than, today's the 6th, so no later than the end of next week, which would be the 15th. And you can either send it to me in the van mail, which is the West Union Field Office, Van Route 5, or you can send it to me electronically at my email address, sschiller@aa1.k12.ia.us. And I know that I haven't gotten your first papers back to you, but I am still working on those. And if you have any questions about that, you can get back to me about that. Please remember, like I said earlier, that anybody who has been CPI trained, you can always contact the CPI trainers that have trained you with any questions. They can come back and review things at any time. Don't be afraid to contact them. We have always been very open about that. And like I said about the Chapter 103 stuff, I know it might be a difficult conversation to have with your administrators, but also don't be afraid to, ask them if you need to be trained or, wonder if you should be trained because of some of the things that you may be dealing with some of your students. Now you can participate and collaborate as groups about behaviors. If you have any questions, please place them in the chat box and I can answer them at this time. They could be questions about any of the recertification stuff, any stuff from the last webinar or this webinar, and I will do the best I can to answer them. I hope everyone who is registered has signed in so that they can get credit for this.